Hello there. In the following video, I am going to be making a pair of historically accurate Iroquoian leggings. To begin with, I think I should clarify what I mean by historically accurate. When a reenactor goes about making a recreation, generally speaking, they find a pattern based off of some surviving example, and they base their recreation on that as closely as they can. This works for medievalists, but doesn't work quite so well for my purposes. In the Middle Ages, most clothes were made from textiles. As one bolt of cloth is more or less the same as the next bolt of cloth, this allows rigid clothing styles to develop. Among the Iroquois, almost all of our clothes were made from leather. One of the characteristics of leather is that every hide is different, just as every deer is different. What this means is that you can't always follow a pattern religiously when you're making leather clothing. Sometimes the dimensions of your hide simply don't match the dimensions of your pattern. When I say this project is historically accurate, I am referring to the materials being used and the mentality of the construction, rather than any specific pattern. The first thing to do when making a pattern is to take stock of your materials. I have 3 pieces of deerskin that I tanned using the traditional methods. These skins are of various sizes, thicknesses, and colorations. Only one of these pieces is large enough to make an entire legging without splicing, and unfortunately it's also several shades darker than the other 2. This means that my pattern is going to require a bit of creativity. However, these are the same problems that my ancestors would have faced. Do I make one leg out of a single piece and the other leg out of 2 pieces and have them not match? Or do I make both legs out of 2 pieces and have them match? Or do I take the third option and wait until I have another hide to cut from? Even once I've made this decision, there are still other decisions to make. What's the nicest looking way to position the splices? Should the darker leather be at the top or at the bottom? Should the thicker leather be at the front or the back? And so on. Here's a look at the most common pattern that was used. It's still used to this day for powwow regalia. As you can see, it's a very simple shape, just a single seam at the side. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to work for me, so I came up with something different. This pattern is based mostly just off of what the leather suggested to me. 2 pieces, one for the upper leg, one for the lower leg, plus a 2-inch strip just to make the leather pieces a little bit wider than I could get otherwise. I'll make the lower half first. After marking my pattern on the leather in pencil, I begin to cut it out. Just for fun, I'm doing the first cut with a flint flake. It works fine, it just blunts really quickly against the floorboards. Finish it off with a knife. In order to conserve material, buckskins are generally made fairly tight-fitting. They'll stretch out quite a bit once you start wearing them. It's easy to overdo it though and make things not fit at all. A tip for making leather fit better is to soak it and then wear it until it dries. In order to make sure that both legs are symmetrical, I take the first piece that I've cut out and use it to trace the second one. Now that the lower pieces are cut out, I have to punch holes before I can sew them together. This is because leather is so much tougher than cloth. Just for fun, I'm doing the first bit with an antler awl. It takes a bit more effort than a steel awl, but it works reasonably well. At least until you break it, it does. Just finish things up with the steel one. And now I'm just about ready to begin sewing. I'm using 2 types of seam here. The vertical seams are to be done normally. The horizontal uses a lap seam. I'm using sinew thread for this project. It is made by taking a tendon and pounding it flat, pulling it apart into strings. It's very strong, but it's tedious to work with because the length of your thread is limited by the length of the tendon, which is generally only about 6 inches long or so. A good technique for sewing with sinew is to start the thread, pull it halfway through, and to work from both ends at once. It makes things easier to tie off, and it means that if you tear your thread, your whole seam isn't going to unravel. I tried using an antler needle for part of the sewing here. It didn't work very well, but I think this reflects more on my needle making skill than on the quality of antler needles in general. A needle should be smaller than the awl used to make the holes, and in this case the opposite was true. Further experimentation is needed. The 2-inch spacer that I added to the seams was an unfortunate necessity. It basically doubled the amount of sewing required. Something nice about working with leather is how stretchy it is. If things don't look quite right, you can always skip a couple of holes and no one will be able to tell the difference. And after a fair few hours, all the pieces are sewn together. I could theoretically stop here and have a pair of leggings that ties on just below the knee, but I want the full length. Now I move on to making the uppers. The piece I'm using for the top has a rounded section near the bottom. I decided to incorporate this into my pattern as a fringe. To cut the fringe, I just take a ruler and cut a slit every 1/4 of an inch or so. Fringes have 3 purposes. The first is to shed water in the rain. The second is extra surface area to aid drying after the rain. And the third is just for looks. The drawback of a fringe is that it uses up a lot of extra leather. I wouldn't have incorporated it if the piece didn't suggest it. Historically, fringes were usually made from the useless scraps left over after previous leatherworking projects. It's true what they say about everything having a use. From there ensued more hole punching and a heck of a lot more sewing. Halfway through the project, I came up with a better method of sewing with sinew. The thing to do is to tie 2 pieces of sinew together and have the knot in between the 2 pieces of leather. This lets you work twice as long before having to put a new piece of sinew in. Riveting stuff, ain't it? Don't know why I thought this would be a good idea for a video, but too late to turn back now. I'll try talking just to keep your attention a little bit longer. It's interesting to me that certain cultures throughout history have preferred the leggings and breechcloth approach rather than trousers. This is a parallel between First Nations peoples and medieval Europeans. Medieval brays are basically an oversized breechcloth. Medieval hose are just leggings with feet. It's not as though trousers are some sort of advanced technological development. Over in England, they went from trousers to brays and hose. There must be some advantage that I'm missing. This is my first experience with authentically tanned leather. It really is wonderful stuff to work with. The smell of it is just intoxicating. It gets into your skin and into your clothes and makes the whole house smell like smoke. Just about done. One last step. A couple of holes need punching near the top to attach the ties. These are attached to a belt to keep the leggings up. I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. That's all I have to say. Goodbye.